Welcome to Adding Years, your roadmap to longevity, a playbook for living healthier and longer. I'm Josie. Along with being a certified personal trainer and longevity enthusiast, I am also a data and AI executive with 4 master's degrees, including one in AI from Johns Hopkins. In each episode, I'll share simple technology and AI-backed strategies with practical steps that you can use to build your own longevity roadmap. I'm not a doctor or medical professional, so be sure to check with your physician before trying anything we discuss on the show. What if the moment you finally stop is the moment your body tells you the truth? Here's a scene that might feel familiar. It's Saturday. The calendar is finally clear, the week is behind you, and in theory, this should be your window to recharge, or at least do something fun. But instead, you're on the couch, not because you're choosing to relax, but because you can't seem to do anything else. It's like all the energy you thought you had suddenly evaporates the moment life stops demanding it. And the strange part? Everything looks fine on paper. You've worked hard, you've slept, you exercised, you checked the wellness boxes. Maybe you even added a few longevity tools on top. But your mind is foggy. Your body feels heavier than it should. And by the time the weekend arrives, you're too drained to even enjoy the life you're working so hard to build. This quiet kind of burnout, the slow, subtle depletion, is more dangerous than it looks. And it's becoming one of the biggest threats to long-term health and longevity. So today, we're asking 3 big questions. How does chronic stress silently accelerate aging, especially for high performers who think they're fine? How can we realistically reduce stress without quitting demanding jobs or lowering ambition? And finally, how can AI help reduce overwhelm and cognitive load instead of adding to it? And by the end of this episode, you'll understand why stress isn't just about mood. It's about lifespan. Stress is one of those things we all think we're managing just fine until we aren't. And the tricky part, high performers often don't notice the early signs. We normalize the pace, we normalize the pressure, and we normalize the constant mental tab shifting. But here's what people don't realize. Chronic stress isn't just psychological, it's biological, and it doesn't announce itself with dramatic breakdowns. It shows up in the quality of your sleep, the speed of your recovery, the clarity of your thinking, the resilience of your mood. And for high performers specifically, the warning signals often don't appear until you finally stop moving. So the real question becomes, what's happening underneath the surface? And why does the body start sending warnings only once we finally stop? To answer that, we need to look under the hood at the biology of stress, longevity, and why high performers are uniquely vulnerable. Most people think stress is a feeling, a sense of overwhelm, a tight chest, maybe a few bad nights of sleep. But biologically, stress is a load-bearing system, and every load has a limit. The challenge is that high performers build a much bigger tolerance window, so they don't feel the warning signs until much later. Their bodies adapt until they can't. Today, we're going to break down what's actually happening inside the body, why chronic stress ages us faster than almost any other variable we face day to day. Let's start with the metaphor. Most people imagine stress as an energy. I'm drained, I'm low battery, I need a recharge. But biologically, stress functions more like an electrical circuit. When the load is manageable, everything hums along just well. When the load climbs, the circuits heat up. And when the load becomes constant, the wires weaken. And when the load surges unexpectedly, the breaker flips. And here's the secret nobody teaches us in school. High performers keep increasing their load without ever noticing the heat, because they're conditioned to push, to handle more, to carry more, to say yes more, to produce more. The body adapts until one day it doesn't. And that quote-unquote false recovery weekend, that's the breaker switching itself off. And when that stress response is activated, the first organ to take the hit is the brain, not the muscles or the heart. And here's the sequence simplified. First, your amygdala goes on alert. It's constantly scanning for threat, not lions or bears, but emails, expectations, social pressure, deadlines, and uncertainty. Next, the hypothalamus triggers a hormonal cascade. This is the start of the stress signal. Think of this as your internal alarm system. Third, your cortisol is released to help you respond. Cortisol isn't the villain, it's the firefighter. It actually helps you focus, solve problems, stay awake, and push through. The problem is chronic activation. When cortisol becomes a constant background hum instead of brief spikes, it rewires the brain. The prefrontal cortex, which is your decision-making section, becomes less efficient. The hippocampus, your memory section, weakens, and the amygdala becomes more and more reactive. And this is why people under long-term stress experience trouble focusing, emotional volatility, mental fatigue, blank mind moments, difficulty switching tasks, and feeling overwhelmed by simple decisions. And because so many high performers experience work-related dreams and sleep disruption, I want to connect that here. When the brain doesn't downshift at night, sleep becomes a maintenance window that the brain never enters. And this is the first domino in accelerated aging. Cortisol, as we mentioned earlier, is meant to spike briefly, then fall. In high performers, the opposite actually happens. Cortisol stays elevated at night, the morning spike becomes muted, your circadian rhythm drifts, your energy becomes unpredictable, your emotional resilience drops, and your creativity declines. In other words, your body starts acting like it's in survival mode even when everything looks normal from the outside. And when cortisol stays high for too long, three major biological systems start to age faster. First is your metabolic aging. Chronic stress increases glucose levels, insulin resistance, appetite dysregulation, and abdominal fat storage. This is the stress belly phenomenon, not caused by food choices alone, but by cortisol dysregulation shifting how and where your body stores energy. Second is immune aging. Long-term stress dampens your immune surveillance, leaving you more vulnerable to infections and slower to heal. You'll start noticing more frequent colds, slower wound healing, higher baseline inflammation, and even reactivation of dormant viruses like Epstein-Barr. Scientists call this immunosenescence, the immune system aging faster than the rest of the body. Third and lastly is cellular aging. This is the part that surprises high performers the most. Stress impacts telomere strength, mitochondrial performance, cellular repair processes, and autophagy efficiency. A landmark study from UCSF found that women experiencing chronic caregiving stress had telomeres that appeared roughly 9 to 17 years older than their chronological age. That means that your cells can interpret your lifestyle as if you're 10 years older than you are. And you feel it in ways that don't look dramatic. Afternoon crashes, some irritability, Sunday dread, weekend depletion, brain fog, and restless sleep. This is the quiet erosion that happens when the stress system never fully turns off. And here's where the danger compounds. Chronic stress doesn't just make sleep worse. Poor sleep amplifies the stress response. And that loop looks like this. You get stressed, so your cortisol gets elevated. Then you get shallow sleep, so you're more stressed. And then you get more sleep disruption, and then your biological aging accelerates. Research from Harvard shows that even one night of partial sleep deprivation can elevate next-day cortisol levels by as much as 37 to 45%. And nights of dreaming about work aren't actually rest. They're a form of cognitive continuation where the brain doesn't fully exit problem-solving mode. And this is why high performers experience waking up tired despite sleeping, light, fragmented sleep, never getting enough deep sleep, emotional reactivity, memory lapses, some micro-motivation crashes, and the inability to mentally recover on weekends. And when stress disrupts sleep for too long, the risk of depression, metabolic disease, cardiovascular strain, and cognitive decline all increase, even if someone feels fine. This is why sleep disruption is one of the earliest and most reliable warning signs in high performers. And as a quick side note, if you're experiencing persistent sleep disruption combined with mood changes, make sure you talk to a healthcare provider. These patterns can indicate underlying conditions that benefit from professional support. Sleep problems aren't a character flaw, they're a signal worth investigating. And one surprising thing is high performers are uniquely vulnerable. People who operate at a high level develop something psychologists call performance adaptation. It's roughly summarized as the more capable you are, the fewer symptoms you notice. Because high performers normalize doing more, they suppress their emotional signals, override exhaustion with discipline, mistake adrenaline for energy, mistake productivity for health, and believe stress is a sign of strength, not damage. This is why interviews with executives, founders, physicians, and elite athletes all show the same pattern. Stress hits them later, but it hits much harder. It doesn't show up as panic attacks or breakdowns. It shows up as weekend collapses, apathy, decreased creativity, irritability, poor recovery, feeling disconnected, loss of joy, sleep fragmentation, work dreams, and chronic tension. These are the early biomarkers of accelerated aging in high performers, not wrinkles or physical fatigue. And remember, longevity isn't about living longer. It's about preserving the capacity to perform, focus, move, and enjoy life. Chronic stress chips away at that capacity slowly. And here's the progression scientists observe. First, it's functional. I'm tired, but I can push. Next is subclinical. I'm not myself, but no one notices. Next is cognitive. Why am I forgetting things? And fourth is emotional. I feel flat. Fifth is physical. Why does my body feel slower? Next, it evolves into behavioral. I can't get myself to do anything. And lastly, biological. Accelerated aging markers rise. Most high performers don't realize they're at stage 4 or 5 until weekends become recovery days instead of joy days. This is exactly the false recovery phenomenon, when your body mistakes shutdown for rest. So the bottom line is this: stress is not just mental, it literally ages your cells. So the next question is, how do I stay ambitious without accelerating the aging process? When it comes to stress and longevity, most people jump straight to the tactics: meditation apps, supplements, morning routines, and productivity hacks. But if you're a high performer, the real leverage isn't in adding more. It's in removing friction and organizing the inputs of your life in a way that your biology can actually keep up with. So let's build a clear ritualistic structure that reframes the two core questions every high performer should ask. What load am I carrying? And how do I reduce the silent load I'm not noticing? We're going to address both with a combination of realistic behavioral change and one AI workflow that makes your mental load lighter instead of heavier. Let's first start with a reframe. Most people misidentify the problem. They think, I need to relax more, I should unwind, I should meditate. Relaxation isn't actually what restores longevity. Predictability is what does that. The human stress system hates chaos. Too many open loops, too many decisions, too many simultaneous expectations, too many tabs open in your mind. Your biology doesn't care how ambitious you are. It cares whether your environment makes sense. So the goal isn't to slow down. The goal is to reduce complexity so that your stress load fits your biology. And that leads us to the single most important decision you can make. Don't optimize your life, organize it. And this is where AI becomes genuinely useful, not overwhelming. But before we build the workflow, let's create the human foundation. And this structure is purpose-built for people who want to stay strong, driven, and ambitious, and also want to age gracefully. It's divided into 3 sections. First is the daily floor, the minimal viable actions that prevents you from slipping into depletion. The second is the weekly reset, a simple structural check-in that keeps chaos from accumulating. And third is the monthly realignment, a longer view recalibration that prevents burnout from sneaking up on you. Let's break them down. First, the daily floor. The daily floor is not an optimal schedule. It's the minimum viable recovery routine that protects you when work is chaotic. Your daily floor includes a non-negotiable wind-down trigger, not a routine, a trigger. Something like dimming the lights, making herbal tea, putting your phone across the room, and washing your face. A brain doesn't need a ritual, it needs predictable cues. Next is a 5-minute mental swap. This is a tiny practical version of clearing cognitive residue. Grab your phone or a notebook and write 3 things still swirling in your head, the next step for each, and whether or not it can wait. The goal is not productivity again. The goal is offloading. And lastly is setting one simple transition boundary. Something like no Slack after 8 p.m., no email after dinner, laptop stays outside of the bedroom, no work talk after brushing your teeth. The boundaries aren't about discipline. They're biological signals that the stress system gets to turn off. Next is the weekly reset. This is where high performers regain control. Every week, usually Sunday or Monday morning, do a 10-minute reset. Make sure you're reviewing your sleep debt, not the numbers, but the patterns. Ask yourself questions like, did I wake up unrested more than twice this week? Did I have work dreams? Did I feel heavy waking up? These are early markers of overload. Next, identify your top 3 life inputs. Work tasks are not the only load you carry. Identify the other 2. Common life inputs look like this. Maybe your relationships, your home responsibilities, health goals, recovery, side projects, emotional bandwidth, decision fatigue from planning. Choose 3 total, and this becomes your load for the week. Everything else becomes optional. And this one I admit is a bit hard, but pre-decide your no. High performers burn out because they haven't chosen their no ahead of time. For example, no new projects this week. No back-to-back late nights. No social commitments on Sundays. One pre-decided no can add years to your life. And finally, the monthly realignment. Make sure you zoom out to recover. Once a month, check something like, am I running on adrenaline or actual energy? Am I waking up in a state of calm or urgency? Am I sleeping or am I just closing my eyes? And am I living predictably or reactively? High performers drift into reactive mode without noticing. This monthly checkpoint helps reset that direction. Earlier, I mentioned how to use AI to organize your life inputs and reduce cognitive load. This is a workflow that you can use with any platform of your choice with the goal of reducing cognitive load, simplifying priorities, and aligning weekly effort with actual recovery. For inputs, give last week's sleep quality both subjective and real collected from a wearable, notable stress moments or your dreams, this week's upcoming meetings and commitments, your top 3 life inputs, and your 1 pre-decided no. From there, your prompt should look something like, here's my sleep quality and stress pattern from last week. Here are all of my upcoming meetings, tasks, and obligations. Here are the 3 life areas I need to prioritize this week. Here is my pre-decided no. Organize this into a realistic weekly plan that prevents overload. Highlight which days need to stay light and frame this around recovery-first performance. The output should look something like a weekly plan that you can transfer to whatever system you actually trust, whether it's your calendar, a whiteboard, Notion, or even a post-it on your laptop. And this workflow turns chaos into clarity. And again, why this helps is because predictability is the ultimate longevity intervention. When people hear stress management, they think meditation, spa days, long breaks, yoga, maybe a nice bubble bath. Those are nice, but they aren't infrastructure. What your biology craves is a predictable signal to turn off, a predictable structure for effort, a predictable window for recovery, a predictable plan for the week, and a predictable boundary for the day. And now that we've built the structure, let's talk about how this looks in real life, not theory. Let me tell you how all of this actually plays out in my own life, because none of this is theoretical for me. For most of my adult life, I told myself a story that I think a lot of high performers will recognize. I'm fine. I can handle this. I just need to get through this week. And for a long time, that story felt true. I've built a career around handling complexity, and I've built an identity around being able to juggle more than the average person. And honestly, I've lived my entire adult life this way. I was the person who kept on going back to school, not because I had to, but because I genuinely wanted to learn more. 4 master's degrees, including one from Johns Hopkins in AI, didn't happen by accident. I didn't take breaks between them. Some years I overlapped the programs while working full time and while climbing through the ranks in tech. My baseline has always been sure, I can add one more thing, and that mentality has served me well professionally. But behind the scenes, it was quietly reshaping my biology in ways I completely missed. Back then, during the period when I was layering school on top of my career, everything looked fine on the surface. I was productive, I was meeting deadlines, I was studying at night, I was learning new things, I was saying yes to opportunities, and I was doing, quote, healthy things whenever I could fit them in. From the outside, it probably looked impressive. From the inside, it felt normal. And because it felt normal, I assumed I was doing great. But every weekend, something strange kept happening. Saturday mornings would arrive, and I'd think, finally, free time. I can do something fun. And then nothing. I'd sit down for a moment, and that moment would turn into the entire day. And it wasn't like I was relaxing. I wasn't recharging, just staring, being still, feeling heavy. Because this wasn't rest, it was shutdown. And here's what hit me the most. I didn't feel stressed and I didn't feel overwhelmed, and so I thought I didn't feel burnt out. I felt empty. And that's the danger of high performance stress. It doesn't show up as panic, it shows up as absence. I remember telling a friend one weekend, half confused and sort of half embarrassed. I genuinely don't understand how people with kids do life. I don't have kids, and I feel like I'm barely keeping up. That sentence wasn't really about comparing, it was just realizing something was off inside me, something I wasn't seeing. Because I wasn't doing anything unusual, I was just doing what I've always done, learning, working, improving, striving. But at some point, my nervous system stopped being impressed with my resume and started sending signals that I was outrunning my biology. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. In dreams about work, in heavy mornings, in weekends that didn't restore me, in the feeling that my tired wasn't normal tired. The real turning point to me came when I stopped looking at my calendar and started looking at my load. Yes, I had a demanding job, and yes, I was pursuing graduate degrees, and yes, I was saying yes to learning opportunities, and I was still trying to maintain healthy habits. But that wasn't the whole story. There was also the cognitive load of constantly being in learning mode, the emotional pressure of high achievement, the decision fatigue of splitting attention between work, school, and life, the internal expectation to excel at everything, the subtle anxiety of academic deadlines, the physical toll of late night study sessions, and the mental tension of always being on. And these things don't show up in your step count. They don't show up in your calendar, but your body feels every single one of them. And I wasn't just tired. I was carrying a multi-layered load that I never acknowledged. And so, on a Sunday afternoon, after a long couch day, it finally clicked to me. The reason I felt wiped out wasn't because I was lazy or unmotivated. It was because my weekdays were powered by adrenaline and structure, and my weekends were revealing the truth. I wasn't resting, I was recovering from surviving, and that's a very different thing. When your weekends become recovery days instead of joy days, that's not a lifestyle issue. That's your nervous system waving a flag. And when I finally asked what would my life look like if I wasn't running on adrenaline, everything changed. The solution wasn't adding more routines, and it definitely wasn't buying more wellness devices, and believe me, I've tried. It wasn't optimizing harder, it was actually subtracting load. I started narrowing my weekly priorities to 3 things and choosing one thing every week I would consciously not do, adjusting effort based on how I actually slept that night, removing my mental clutter, using AI to organize life inputs so that my brain didn't have to carry everything, and acknowledging that training, my career, and learning all counted as stress. And for the first time in a long time, my nervous system exhaled. My sleep improved, my weekends felt human again, my mood stabilized, my energy became consistent instead of unpredictable, and I didn't feel like I needed a full day just to come back to myself. And I didn't feel less ambitious. I just became less overloaded. And that difference, that one reframe, gave me back years. And one thing that I was surprised to learn was that real recovery doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like a subtle normalcy returning. Mornings that don't feel heavy, going a full night without work dreams, enjoying a Saturday instead of enduring it, laughing more easily, thinking more clearly, and feeling like yourself again. And the biggest insight again was that my ambition wasn't the problem. My unmanaged load was. And that realization really changed everything for me. Not by slowing me down, but by giving me back the capacity to actually experience my life. The stress and burnout space, I've learned, is full of mixed messages, some helpful and many very outdated. Let's clear up some of the biggest misconceptions that can quietly accelerate aging instead of preventing it. Myth 1. Burnout is dramatic and you'll definitely see it coming. The truth? Most high performers never crash. They fade. If your weekends disappear into recovery, that's burnout's silent version. Myth 2. If you're sleeping 7 to 8 hours, you're fine. The truth is that you can still sleep 8 hours and not still get restorative sleep. And it's really not about that sleep quantity. It's about whether your nervous system actually gets to shut off. Myth 3. Stress is just a mindset problem. No, stress is a full body physiological response. You can't positive think your way out of an elevated cortisol. You need recovery structure. Myth 4. Multitasking makes you efficient. Actually, multitasking fragments your attention and raises cognitive load. Single tasking is actually a longevity intervention. And lastly, work dreams are normal. Everyone dreams about work. Actually, dreaming about work is a sign that your brain didn't exit the problem-solving mode. Your sleep is telling you that your stress system stayed on all night. So let's bring this home. We opened with that quiet, familiar moment, the weekend collapse. The version of burnout that doesn't look dramatic at all, but shows up as stillness, emptiness, or that sense of why am I this drained when I'm doing everything right? Now that we've explored the biology, the psychology, and the real-world patterns, let's answer the 3 big questions we started with. First, how does chronic stress silently accelerate aging, especially for high performers who think they're fine? Because the stress system adapts until it can't, and the earliest signs show up in sleep, mood, and recovery long before they show up in performance. Second, how can we realistically reduce stress without quitting demanding jobs or lowering our ambition? We can do that by reducing complexity, organizing life inputs, and building predictable recovery into our day, week, and month. And lastly, how can AI help reduce the overwhelm and cognitive load instead of adding to it? By turning chaos into clarity, organizing your commitments, sequencing tasks, and aligning effort with the actual recovery patterns. And here's an easy way to remember the structure we built today. Low. L. Lower the chaos, pre-decide your no, and simplify inputs. O. Organize the week. 3 priorities with an AI-supported plan. W. Wind down predictably. 1 nightly cue that signals off. Low stress, high longevity. So tonight, choose your wind down trigger. Just one. Lights dimmed, phone away, tea made, face washed. That's it. Let your nervous system feel one clear, predictable cue that the day is over. And remember, burnout isn't a failure. It's a message. Your body isn't saying slow down forever. It's saying, give me structure so I can keep up with the life you're building. And when you do that, your energy will come back quietly, consistently, and sustainably. Thank you for spending your time with me today on Adding Years, your roadmap to longevity. If you found this episode helpful, please follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and consider leaving a review. Before we wrap up, a quick but important reminder. Adding Years is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always consult your physician or qualified healthcare provider before making changes to your health regimen, supplements, or exercise routine. What you hear on this show reflects personal opinions, experiences, and not medical advice. I'm Josie, and this is Adding Years. Until next time, here's to living better, longer.